Now here's a question that has to do with a tactic that I haven't written about and haven't really talked about very much, but a couple of people have referred to called moving the goalpost. I've never used a tactic called that, although that's a pretty clever phrase because I know what they're referring to. And I have had this thing come up. And the idea of moving the goalpost is that people keep changing the criteria regarding some particular issues so that you can never satisfy them. I can think of two examples of this. One of them is when people say there is no proof for God's existence. Now, of course, the trick word there is the word proof. That's the goalpost that can keep moving if you don't clarify it to begin with. So you say, of course there's proof for God's existence. Here it is, boom, boom, boom. And you give the evidence. This is what I take proof to mean, like a reasonable argument that goes through or probably goes through. Well, you give the evidence and they say, well, that's not proof. And you think, well, all right, how about this? And you give some more evidence and say, well, that's not proof. And the problem is since you haven't clarified the meaning of proof to begin with, they can keep adjusting the definition throughout the conversation so that you never satisfy it. The important thing in that kind of situation, and in all of these with moving the goalpost, is to figure out what the standard is to begin with. So when somebody says that there is no proof that God exists, you need to first ask the question, well, what kind of evidence would be adequate from your perspective? What would satisfy you? What is the kind of thing? Now the ball's in their court. They have to then tell you very precisely where that goal line is, so to speak, so that you can know what you're shooting for. And it probably, in many cases, for those who raise this question about proof for God with the intent of keep moving the goalpost, when you ask them for a clear definition, they're just not going to give it to you. Or they're going to give you something so extreme, you could never satisfy that requirement. In that case, once they give you the definition, that is, well, God's going to have to show up right in front of me. He's going to have to appear before me. That would be proof. You might note, as one person did, that wouldn't make them go to God. That would make them go to a psychiatrist if something like that happened. But that the standard that they're requiring of proof is a higher standard than they require for anything else. It's a higher standard than they require to put somebody away for life or even to take their life at capital punishment through the criminal system, which standard there is only beyond a reasonable doubt. So you want to make them establish the goalpost. Here's the other illustration that I thought of, and it just happened recently on a radio show, of somebody moving the goalpost. When I had just done a whole show with Scott Klusendorf, or at least a whole hour and a half, on the pro-life issue and his new book, Making a Case for Life, or A Case for Life. Someone called in and asked me how many children, foster children, had I adopted, or am I taking care of, and how many foster children is Scott taking care of. Now, of course, what this implicitly is the argument that I can't campaign against abortion unless I'm willing to take in all of those children that are born that wouldn't have been born if abortion had been allowed. Now, this is a bad argument. Morally, it's obvious when you just make the point, just because I'm not willing to marry your wife doesn't mean that I can't object to you beating her. Or if we don't want to kill all homeless people, we are still justified in offering that argument, even if we're not wanting them all to live, we're not willing for them to all move into our own homes. That's the moral issue there. But what happened in this case is I mentioned that I had adopted 2 children and that Scott and I both were raising funds for pro-life crisis pregnancy centers to help women who keep their children. And the caller just moved on after that. Like, she just ignored what I had to say and was on to more objections. And I called her back to the question. And I simply asked her, look, you asked me what I was doing, and I told you what I was doing, which strikes me as rather significant and a lot more than most people are doing. And I want to know if that satisfies you. And she just simply said, no, it doesn't. And became clear in the conversation that nothing would satisfy her. No matter if I adopted every single kid in the world, it still would satisfy her if there was one child that might be left behind. So this is a disingenuous challenge on us, and the way to deal with people who keep moving the goalpost is to first, before you answer the question, establish where that goalpost is with regards to the particular question that you have in mind.